Tonight, friends, in today's episode, we share some spine-chilling summer horror stories that probably will give you some chills. But before we begin, please consider giving us a like. It really helps us out. Also, if you've got a true freaky story of your own, send to me and I'll probably add it to a future video. At 14 years old, I was in the middle of a full-blown rebellion. I was convinced I didn't need anyone telling me what to do. Parents, teachers, anyone in authority. I pushed boundaries wherever I could, sneaking out, skipping school, and finding trouble more often than not. My mom, desperate to rein me in, decided that drastic measures were needed. She started dropping me off at Narcotics Anonymous meetings, hoping I'd see the consequences of living recklessly and maybe learn something from the people there. That night, she took me to a halfway house in one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city. The house itself was old and weathered, its paint peeling, and the windows reinforced with bars. I didn't want to be there, but my mom didn't give me a choice. "I'll pick you up at the gas station after," she said, pointing to a spot a few blocks away before driving off. The meeting was uneventful, filled with stories from people who'd lived lives I couldn't imagine. They were rough around the edges but kind, many of them making small talk with me, even though I didn't have much to say. The meeting ended around 8 or 9 p.m. It was summer, so the sun had set, leaving the streets cloaked in darkness. I lingered a little, reluctant to start the walk to the gas station alone, but eventually I left, stepping out into the warm but eerie night. The walk to the gas station was just 2.5 blocks, short, but it felt longer as I moved through the quiet streets. My sneakers scuffed the sidewalk, the only sound breaking the silence. I tried to act normal, keeping my head down, but I couldn't ignore the prickling sense of unease crawling up my spine. As I turned onto the second block, I noticed a group of men gathered on a porch. There were 4 of them, loud and unruly, their laughter carrying down the street. One of them leaned over a mirror, snorting something that glinted under the dim porch light. I knew instantly they weren't the type to be ignored, but I kept walking, hoping to pass unnoticed. "Hey!" one of them called out, his voice cutting through the still air. "Where you going, girl?" I didn't respond, didn't even glance in their direction. My pulse quickened as their shouts turned into jeers and whistles. I kept my pace steady, trying not to show the fear bubbling up inside me. But then I heard footsteps, several pairs of them, and realized they were following me. "Don't you ignore us!" one of them yelled, his tone menacing now. My heart raced as I quickened my steps, but so did they. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear their laughter, their taunts, and the unmistakable edge of anger in their voices. "You can't hide from us!" one of them shouted. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a full sprint, the gas station still too far away. My breath came in ragged gasps as I darted down the street, my mind racing. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I couldn't let them catch me. My legs burned as I sprinted down the street. The men's voices were growing louder behind me, their footsteps quick and unrelenting. I knew I couldn't outrun them. The gas station was still too far, and with every step, my panic grew. I scanned the street frantically for somewhere, anywhere, I could hide. Then I saw it. A parked truck in a driveway, its shadow stretching across the ground. Without thinking, I veered toward it and dropped to my stomach, sliding underneath. Gravel dug into my palms as I pressed myself flat against the ground, trying to make my body as small as possible. My chest heaved, but I forced myself to breathe shallowly, terrified they would hear me. The men's voices drew closer, angry and sharp. "Where'd she go?" one of them barked. "She can't have gone far." Their footsteps crunched on the pavement, then onto the gravel of the driveway. My heart stopped as they searched the yard, their shadows looming just feet away from where I lay hidden. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense, as one of them walked so close I could see his shoes from under the truck. He muttered something I couldn't make out, and I silently begged for him to keep walking. After what felt like an eternity, they cursed loudly and began to retreat. "Forget it," one of them said. "She's gone." I waited, trembling until their voices faded into the distance. My body felt frozen, every nerve on edge, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Summoning what courage I had left, I crawled out from under the truck, my limbs stiff and shaky, and darted toward the backyard. I climbed over a fence, scraping my hands on the rough wood, and landed awkwardly in the backyard of a neighboring house. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled through the darkness, every sound making me flinch. The halfway house was my only hope now. I pushed forward, my fear driving me, until I reached its familiar outline. Light spilled from the windows, and I could see the group still gathered inside. Bursting through the door, I gasped for breath, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "They chased me," I managed to say. "A group of men. They were following me." The room went silent as the members of the NA group processed what I had said. Then, without hesitation, they sprang into action. Some stayed behind to comfort me, their voices calm and reassuring as they locked the doors and windows. Others left immediately, their faces set with grim determination. I didn't know what they planned to do, but the anger in their eyes told me they wouldn't let those men get away with it. After a while, a few of the men returned, their expressions unreadable. They didn't say much, but I didn't need them to. Whatever had happened out there, I felt safe with them. When it was time to leave, a group of them escorted me to the gas station, walking on either side of me as a shield. When I saw my mom waiting there, relief flooded over me, and I ran into the car. The drive home was quiet, my mom gripping the steering wheel tightly as I told her what had happened. After a few minutes, we got home, and everything turned out fine. But what stayed with me wasn't the fear of that night. It was the courage of the people in the NA group. They had no obligation to help me, a kid they barely knew, yet they didn't hesitate to protect me. I never learned what happened when they confronted the men, but I have no doubt they handled it in their own way. To this day, I'm grateful for their kindness and bravery. That night taught me that even in the darkest moments, there are people willing to stand up and do what's right. Their actions left a mark on me, a reminder of the power of community and the strength found in unexpected allies. It was supposed to be the perfect summer getaway. My friend and I had decided to spend a few days in a picturesque seaside town, one known for its charm and lively atmosphere. The days were filled with sunshine, visits to the beach, and sampling the local cuisine. Everything about the trip felt carefree, a much-needed break from the monotony of daily life. On the second night, we decided to celebrate my 21st birthday by going to one of the town's popular bars. My friend had already started drinking at dinner and was more than a little tipsy by the time we arrived. The bar was packed, the music loud, and the energy infectious. I was still sober when we entered, but that didn't stop my friend from immediately diving into more drinks. Amid the crowd, a woman caught my eye, or rather, her unnaturally bright red hair did. She was hard to miss, her presence commanding in a way that didn't seem entirely natural. She introduced herself as Candace and quickly struck up a conversation, her attention split between flirting with me and engaging with my drunken friend. At first, it all seemed harmless, just a friendly interaction in a lively bar, but there was something about her I couldn't quite place, a sharpness to her gaze that made me uneasy, though I pushed the thought aside. As the night wore on, Candace's focus shifted. My friend, now visibly intoxicated, became her center of attention. When he started stumbling and slurring his words, the bartender intervened, insisting he leave. Candace volunteered to take care of him, her smile warm but insistent. I felt a wave of discomfort. I barely knew her, and there was no way I was leaving my friend alone with a stranger. "If he's going, I'm coming too," I said firmly. She hesitated but quickly adapted, her demeanor never faltering. "Fine," she said, "but he should go home safely. I'll call him a taxi." Her tone was persuasive, and despite my unease, I agreed. My friend was bundled into a cab, mumbling thanks as it pulled away, leaving me alone with her. "We're going to my place," Candace said cheerfully, linking her arm through mine as we walked. The streets were quiet, the buzz of the bar fading behind us. As we moved, she produced a flask and handed it to me, encouraging me to drink. I took a small sip, pretending to indulge, but something about her insistence set off alarm bells. Each time she passed me the flask, I pretended to drink more, secretly pouring most of it out when she wasn't looking. Her house came into view, a small nondescript building on a quiet street. My unease deepened, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Inside, the lights were dim, and the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, disappearing into another room. I sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, my nerves on high alert. Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Sitting on the couch, I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. My discomfort grew when I realized how little I knew about Candace, her unnaturally bright red hair, her charm, her insistence on me drinking heavily. It all felt rehearsed, calculated. But what tipped me over the edge was what I overheard. I had excused myself to use the bathroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. As I washed my hands, I heard her whispering from the other side of the door. Her words were low and hurried, but one sentence stood out clearly. "He's drunk as hell. You do it." My stomach dropped. She wasn't talking to herself. Someone else was there. My pulse quickened as I leaned closer to the door, trying to catch more, but the voices stopped abruptly. When I returned to the living room, my heart sank further. Candace was gone, or at least someone who looked like Candace was sitting in her place. The unnaturally bright red hair was the same, but the face was different, subtly so, but unmistakably different. Her smile was just as charming, but her eyes were cold, almost mocking. I froze for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. "Everything okay?" the new woman asked, her tone too casual. I nodded stiffly, forcing a weak smile. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I knew I couldn't let them see my fear. "I think I need to use the bathroom again," I said, excusing myself as casually as I could. Inside the bathroom, panic set in. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't stay, but I also couldn't walk out the front door. Whatever was happening, I didn't trust they'd let me leave. As I stood there frozen, I heard the whispers again. This time, a man's voice responded, low and gruff. "Just do it already," he said. My breath hitched, and I realized my time was running out. I glanced around the small bathroom, my eyes landing on the window. It was small, but just big enough for me to squeeze through. Without a second thought, I unlocked it, pushed it open, and climbed out, scraping my hands and knees on the rough sill. The night air hit me like a shock, but I didn't stop. I dropped into the backyard, landing awkwardly, and immediately bolted through the rows of overgrown grass. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I jumped over fences, darted through backyards, and ran down unfamiliar streets, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Every sound, every distant car horn, every rustle of leaves felt like it was them, chasing me. I didn't stop until I reached the glow of a convenience store. Inside, I called a taxi, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. When the car arrived, I collapsed into the back seat, giving the driver the address of my hotel. The ride home felt like an eternity, every passing car making me flinch. When I finally reached my room, I locked the door, turned on all the lights, and sat awake until morning. The next day, I replayed the events of the night before. Determined to get answers, I convinced a group of friends to return to the house with me. We arrived in the early afternoon, the bright sunlight doing little to ease my nerves. The house looked different in the daylight, smaller, less menacing, but the sense of unease remained. We knocked on the door, but no one answered. Peering through the windows, we saw nothing, no furniture, no signs of life. It was as though the house had been abandoned overnight. A neighbor, curious about our presence, came out to talk to us. "That place isn't rented right now," they said. "It's just a summer rental, and no one's supposed to be there." The realization sent a chill through me. Whoever had been there the night before wasn't supposed to be. They had broken in, used the house, and vanished without a trace. My friends tried to reassure me, saying I'd done the right thing by leaving, but the questions gnawed at me. Who were they? What were they planning? And why had they gone to such lengths to lure me in? I never got answers, but I didn't need them to know how close I had come to something terrible. In 2015, at 19 years old, I spent my summer volunteering at an aid camp in a transitioning neighborhood. The area was gentrifying, but the echoes of its rougher past were still apparent. Graffiti-covered walls, abandoned lots, and an uneasy quiet that settled over the streets after dark. The camp operated out of a large, aging two-story house. The first floor was dedicated to activities with the children, while the counselors lived upstairs. We were assured the house was safe. The doors were always locked, the windows were barred, and the neighborhood kids respected the work we were doing. At least, that's what we told ourselves to sleep better at night. Between the chaotic days with the kids and the close quarters we shared upstairs, we quickly became a tightly knit group. It was hard work, but there was something comforting about our little routines, even in an unfamiliar and occasionally intimidating environment. One night, I noticed something odd. I'd stocked the staff fridge with snacks earlier in the week, chips, a couple of sodas, but now they were gone. It wasn't unusual for people to take things without asking, so I mentioned it offhand to Chris, my friend and fellow counselor. We laughed about it, but the missing snacks sparked mild tension in the group, especially with Sarah, a visiting cousin of one of the counselors. Sarah had lost her phone and wallet earlier that day and was adamant that someone must have taken them. The night carried on, and I tried to brush off the unease. It wasn't until later, while searching upstairs for Sarah's belongings, that things took a strange turn. As I moved through the dimly lit hallway, I spotted something that made me freeze. A hand, slowly creeping into view near the doorframe of an empty room. My heart leapt, and I instinctively called out, "Who's there?" The hand vanished in an instant. I ran toward the room, but it was empty. Chris and I searched every corner of the house, but we found no one. Sarah was convinced someone had been inside and taken her things, but without any proof, we chalked it up to paranoia. The police were called, but there wasn't much they could do. We tried to move on, but the incident lingered in the back of my mind, an unsettling puzzle piece I couldn't quite place. A few days later, the unease had mostly settled. The routine of running the camp with the kids kept us distracted, and the strange events from earlier seemed less threatening in the light of day. That evening, after the kids had gone home, Chris and I stayed late to clean up the kitchen. The summer heat hung in the air, the kind that made the house feel stifling even after sunset. As we worked, Chris noticed the kitchen door was ajar. She nudged it closed with her foot, turning to me with a grin. "Looks like our visitor's back," she joked, referencing the mysterious hand I'd seen days earlier. I laughed nervously, but her teasing planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Ever the prankster, Chris decided we should search the house for our phantom guest. "Come on, let's make sure the boogeyman's not hiding in the closets," she said, grabbing a flashlight. I followed her reluctantly, not entirely convinced we wouldn't find something, or someone. We worked our way through the house, joking to lighten the tension, until Chris opened a closet near the back of the house. Her scream pierced the air, sharp and sudden. Before I could process what was happening, she bolted out the front door, leaving me standing frozen in the hallway. Confused and alarmed, I stepped toward the closet and came face to face with him. A man crouched inside, his clothes filthy and his hair matted. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild but eerily calm, and his grin stretched unnaturally wide. "I didn't mean no harm," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly, like he was speaking through a smirk. The words froze me in place as my mind scrambled to process what I was seeing. Before I could react, he stood, backing out of the closet slowly before turning and slipping out the back door into the night. I stumbled back from the closet, my breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a scream. My legs felt rooted to the floor as the man disappeared through the back door, his disheveled figure swallowed by the darkness outside. Chris was still outside, pacing in the driveway, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. "There was a man," she stammered as I joined her. "In the closet. There was someone in the closet." We stared at each other, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. The laughter and jokes from earlier felt like a distant memory, replaced by a suffocating sense of dread. The house that had once felt like a secure sanctuary now seemed foreign and exposed, its shadows hiding threats we hadn't even considered. We called the police immediately, describing the man as best as we could. The responding officers combed through the house, searching every room, closet, and corner. Though they found signs that someone had been living there, a dirty blanket, some wrappers, and an empty water bottle, there was no sign of the man himself. They reassured us that he was likely a transient and suggested we be more vigilant about locking doors, but their words did little to calm us. Departure left a strange silence in the house, one that felt heavier with the knowledge that a stranger had been among us, unseen and unnoticed. The next day, the camp resumed as usual, but the energy among the counselors was different. We kept glancing over our shoulders, our laughter strained and forced. Chris and I had shared what had happened, and while some of the others brushed it off as an isolated incident, Sarah was convinced it explained the missing phone and wallet. "He's been here for days," she said, her voice trembling. "We just didn't know it." Later that evening, 2 officers returned to follow up on the incident. After further investigation, they confirmed what we had all feared. The man had been living in the house. The signs were subtle: a makeshift sleeping area hidden in an unused storage room, a faint but lingering smell of unwashed clothing, and a trail of scuffed dirt leading to the back door. It wasn't clear how long he'd been there, but it was long enough for us to feel thoroughly unsettled. Sarah's missing belongings, my vanished snacks, and the creeping hand I'd seen near the doorframe suddenly made horrifying sense. He hadn't just passed through. He'd been watching us, moving through the house, and waiting for the right moments to act unseen. Though the man was never caught, his presence lingered like a shadow over the rest of the summer. We doubled down on security, checking locks obsessively and never walking through the house alone. Chris and I found ourselves sticking close to each other, our playful banter replaced by a wary silence. Even the kids picked up on the tension, though we tried to shield them from the truth. We never learned who the man was or what his intentions had been, but his eerie grin and muttered words stayed with me.